Alright guys, here's some tools that you can use to do more board modifications, fixing boards, altering boards, chops, what have you. Some of these tools are going to be more expensive, some of them are going to be really cheap, so you don't need to have all of these tools, and I'm going to try and give you some cheaper options as well in this list. Okay, I've got the drill. Pretty crucial if you want to do any re-drilling of mounting holes, things like that. It's a very common early modification for people to do. Something you just kind of should probably have. It's useful for tons of different home improvement stuff anyways. One tip that I do have for re-drilling is re-drill from the underside of the board, not the top, because really what you really need is straight holes from the bottom, not necessarily the straightest possible holes from the top. So drill from the underside. Whenever you cut into the board with a saw or you sand it or anything like that, you always want to seal the board back up. So you can get just a spray can of polyurethane spray to seal it up. You can also just use like a typical like wood stain like this one. If you want to change the color of the grain of the wood by a little bit, you can change it with a wood stain. This is just a natural one, so it pretty much keeps it the same, but you can always go darker. If you ever have a D-lam in your board and your board is just made of typical wood, you can always reseal the board up with wood glue. What you're going to want to do is go into that D-lam, open it up a little bit, drop some of your glue into that gap, and then you want to reseal that up. Usually use a Type-On 3. You can go Type-On 2. I wouldn't go Type-On 1 because I'm pretty sure it's not waterproof. Type-On 2 or 3 for a couple more bucks, why not? But yeah, wood glue, good to have. For any of your D-lam problems, you're going to need to clamp it back up. So after you fill the D-lam with wood glue, you're then going to want to clamp this guy up. When it comes to D-lams and the pressure that you push, you don't actually want to go too hard with the pressure. Once you start seeing the glue actually coming out of the D-lam just a little bit, that's as far as you want to go. If you go too far, you're going to push too much glue out and you're not really going to seal it up. Sanding block, really cheap. It's like the cheapest way you can sand besides just using the paper, but it's way more effective than the paper. You can put so much more pressure evenly across with a sanding block. Just cut the paper, put it into here, wrap it around, put it into here, and then you've got yourself, for a lot of applications, what you would need for sanding for really cheap. Orbital Sander. If you want to go up from the sanding block and you have a bigger job to do, Orbital Sander will get the job done way faster. I use Orbital Sanders for cleaning up rails, rounding the underside rail especially, and it's overall good for, you know, more fine sanding processes. If I don't want to remove a lot of wood, I just kind of want to, you know, polish it up a bit, this is what I'm going to go with. Usually a 120 grit is good. 60 grit would be good for totally removing material, 120 for just kind of smoothing things out, 200 for finishing, and above that and you're going to be really fancy. Belt sander like this one, if you want to remove a lot of material, this is going to be your fastest way to do it. This is probably one of the more unnecessary tools, I would say, when it comes to board modification. If you're minimizing the width of a board, like you've got a board that's 9.5 and you want to bring it down to 9.25, this would be the right tool to use versus a saw. Saw is going to remove a lot more material. This is easier to make finer adjustments, but this will grind the board down really quickly, so you got to be careful. Happy New Year, man! If you're chopping a board, this is probably the tool that you want to use for it. Sure, you can use a typical handsaw, but the width of this blade being so skinny allows you to make tighter curves that you would probably want when you're actually chopping the board down itself. The only time I wouldn't use the jigsaw when I am chopping a board down, if I'm chopping less than 1/4 inch off of the edges, especially the rails, then I will just go with the belt sander or orbital sander if it's really that fine. A chisel doesn't have as many uses as the other tools. However, you can really slowly, and when I say really slowly, I mean it. If you work really slowly, you can go ahead and put flush mounts into a board, or chiseled out wheel wells you can in a board, but you got to be really careful because you can cut a little too deep with this. So it'll take a long time, but you can, for a lot less money than other tools, you can create flush mounting in your board with a chisel and a hammer. Outside of using a chisel for flush mounting and wheel wells, you can use a router. A router is a more expensive option. It'll go way faster though, and you can be really, really precise with the cutting depth that you do with a router. Router, also a really, really dangerous tool, so you gotta be really careful with a router. Don't mess around. Something I don't have with me right now is Mod Podge. Mod Podge is kind of like a sealer and glue that you can use to apply graphics. I use Mod Podge sometimes when I'm creating a new graphic by laying down magazine images and using Mod Podge to seal over that. If you guys want to actually see how that works, then let me know. We can make a video for that too. This board graphic was made with spray paint and Mod Podge, and so far it's been waterproof. So far. Heat gun, it's like the much better version of the hairdryer. If you are removing any grip tape, heat gun will go so much faster. If you are putting down new grip tape and you're using Loctite or something that is not really flexible, this makes it a lot easier. Last use that you can use for a heat gun is for board warping. You can weight down using a clamp on the board and maybe a weight or like a gallon of water or something like that. You can weight down the clamp and you can slowly pass over with the heat gun and it will actually undo whatever warping that you've got. Last tool is the good old-fashioned ruler. If you are doing any board chopping, it's always good to be really precise because the chop is forever, and if you think it looks pretty good by eyeballing it, I'm sure you're going to notice in a few months after skating the board for a while, you'll notice all the little imperfections about how you cut it. So, good to have a ruler. Alright, that's pretty much all the tools that I use when I'm building boards and when I am modifying boards, all that kind of stuff. If you want me to go more in depth in any of the processes that I talked about in the video, let me know. We'll make a video.